Drew Robinson is a former Major League Baseball player, mental health advocate, speaker, and co-founder of the Better Universe Foundation. Born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, Drew was originally drafted by the Texas Rangers out of high school and went on to play parts of 12 seasons with the Rangers, St. Louis Cardinals, and San Francisco Giants organizations. In 2020, Drew miraculously survived a suicide attempt that resulted in the loss of his right eye. In 2021, ESPN released an E60 documentary to tell Drew's story, create awareness around mental health, and reduce the stigma around it. After Drew's attempt, he made a comeback to professional baseball and retired after the 2021 season to pursue a role in the mental health and wellness department with the San Francisco Giants. Drew is dedicated to advocating for mental health through working to end the stigma, sharing his journey, and supporting others. Everyone, please welcome Drew Robinson.
Thank you so much, Andy, and welcome, Drew. Welcome to College of Marin.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you all for being here as well. I'm Ryan. This is Jerome. So we're going to be co-moderating this event tonight, and we're excited to jump into it. We're going to have a powerful conversation, touches on your story as a professional athlete and your role as a mental health advocate. And then afterwards, we're going to open it up for questions at the end. So before we get started, though, let's get real. Who do you got winning the World Series this year?
Comeback of the year. Comeback of the century, Giants. Let's go.
Hey.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Right here first.
Love it.
Well, welcome to Marin County, man. It's a beautiful day outside, 80 degrees. Just stereotypical California weather, right? So you spent parts of 12 seasons in Major League Baseball with the Texas Rangers, St. Louis Cardinals, San Francisco Giants organizations. But your love of baseball started around 6 years old while growing up in Las Vegas, Nevada. Can you tell us what your childhood was like growing up in Las Vegas?
Yeah, I think I lived a pretty stereotypical childhood, just constantly playing outside with my friends and following in my older brother's footsteps, who was a very good athlete, and really just kind of living in his shadow. But we eventually both became obsessed and loved baseball. So, like I said, just pretty standard 1990s childhood, and just constantly playing some kind of sport, while also dealing with some challenging times at home. I grew up in a pretty split household. My mom and dad weren't necessarily right for each other, and I think they knew it, but they tried to hold on to the marriage for the family's sake. And as a young child, very young, obviously, I just didn't know what was going on. I wasn't able to put words to what I was feeling within that situation. And when they eventually came split by divorce, it was just something that understandably put a wedge between our family. And it, again, as a kid and as a male that was just told to always tough everything out when it comes to sports and stuff, I think I just unintentionally try to do that with my own emotions in my home life. So it's something that my childhood had some turbulence, but at the end of the day, looking back, something that I think about often these days is the older I get, the easier my childhood has become.
Right.
So all three of us were athletes, and I don't want to throw any shade toward Jerome, but I was not a highly touted youth athlete, and obviously you were much more talented than I was. How was it growing up being a talented prospect as a youth athlete, and what were some of the pressures that maybe went with that?
Yeah, it's always kind of interesting with my story on this in the early stages, because I was very undersized my entire life up until my junior year of high school. So even on my little league teams or on my travel ball teams and up until my junior year of high school, I was always kind of a backup and was kind of the fill-in guy when whoever pitched, because everyone when we're younger pitches, right? So, but I was always last in line. So whoever pitched, I would just go play their position. And then first 2 years of a very average, even below average high school team. I wasn't even able to crack the roster. So thank God for a late growth spurt going into my junior year. And it's something that, although I didn't have the pressures of always performing because I was the best player on the team, I put this internal pressure on myself growing up, because while I was experiencing that, like I said earlier, my older brother, he was the exact opposite of this, where he was kind of a national prodigy his entire life, and so living in his shadows, kind of looking up to him and really just idolizing him in a sports way. It was always a little frustrating, because I was just sitting there like, man, why can't I be the 6'4" freshman or the 6'3" seventh grader? And what happened to me? And so kind of living in my brother's footsteps of being Chad's little brother and being athletic, but being very small, it was something that I put a lot of internal pressure. And again, at the time, no way I would have been able to put words to that. I just reacted in an outwardly way that I wasn't able to comprehend and put words to. And so I was a very roller coaster of emotion kind of kid. And unfortunately, when things were going bad, that showed. And when things were going good, that showed. But I was pretty, looking back, pretty unstable when it came from a mental, emotional standpoint, because I put that pressure on myself. So not to say that it was also very fun growing up and being able to play sports the way we did. But it was kind of interesting, because although I was fortunate enough to reach the major leagues, I really didn't even get playing time until my junior year of high school. And then a year and a half later, I was drafted. So it was a very fast process, but it's something that looking back, I'm grateful for it. But it was definitely a little bit of a up and down kind of experience.
Drew, while, growing up when we're young, we idolize, athletes, right? We watch TV and, we see the Tom Brady's and Joe Montanas and whatnot, or the Barry Bonds and baseball and such. And then we mimic them, right? We go in the backyard. We're like, it's like Game 7 World Series. And, I'm going to hit the game winning home run. And then it comes to a point when you are young, you start thinking like, hey, maybe I can do this like professionally, right? At what age did it hit you when you were like, I want to play professional baseball?
Yeah, it was probably about really towards the end of my junior year of high school. Like I said, I hit the growth spurt, and I was fortunate to the person I was playing shortstop before me. He had graduated, so I had an opportunity to play, and kind of complemented that growth spurt with some good performance. So at the end of throughout my junior year, and then at the end, I started getting some attention that my brother had, I guess, lingered for me with all the scouting that he received. They knew that there was another Robinson kid there, but since I wasn't playing, I wasn't getting it much. But luckily, I was able to take advantage of that opportunity. And it really wasn't until personally after that season I was even thinking about it. And me and one of my closer friends from high school, we still even talk about this memory at times, still to this day, of he's a freshman, I'm a junior, before the season starting, and he just spent the night one time and mentioning, because he was a very good, very gifted freshman, and we joke about like, man, it's so cool. My brother he's playing professional baseball right now, and it sucks that I'm not going to be able to, but it's going to be awesome that you're going to get to, because you're so good already. It's only understandable that you're going to be able to in 4 years be able to be draft worthy. So before my junior year started, I was pretty much convinced that I wasn't going to be getting that opportunity. So thankfully that season went well, and I was able to get some attention. And like I said, between that and a calendar year later, I had a lot of conversations and scouting, and was able to get the phone call.
So can you speak on that? So what was that like back in 2010 as a high school athlete, senior year, getting scouted? You get that call from the Texas Rangers. Like, what went through your mind in that moment?
It was just very exciting. Like I said, it was something that 2 years prior wasn't even on my radar. But as a kid playing baseball my whole life, I obviously idolized, like you said, my favorite players. My older brother was playing professional baseball at the time, so I was very excited to be able to follow in his footsteps and kind of be on his level for the first time, maybe. And so getting that phone call was also kind of interesting, because out of all the teams that I was talking to beforehand, the Rangers weren't the most communicative team, so I didn't think that they were as interested. So when I was following the tracker on the computer of who's taking who, when the Ranger spot came up, I kind of disengaged from the computer and then heard the name called, and then I got the phone call. So it was a whirlwind of emotions, and me and my two high school buddies that were over watching it just had a quick little celebration. And from then, like 24 hours later, I was on a flight to Texas to get my physicals, and
wow,
it was just a very exciting time. It's something that once I had that opportunity to start playing and had some success, I went all in. I think my senior year, I don't think I went to one party, didn't go to one
Right.
dance.
You're just out
I went all in. So when I finally achieved that call, it felt very gratifying because I had put the work in, and it was something that, again, 2 years prior wasn't even on my radar.
Wow.
So I'm going to go through a little bit of a timeline here. So please feel free to fact check me on this. But let's go back to 2018 for you. So my understanding is that you were playing with the Rangers organization. You played for their AA and AAA affiliates. Then you were traded to the Cardinals organization, spent some time playing for their AAA affiliate, the Memphis Redbirds. That kind of movement is pretty common for professional baseball players, but maybe not what you'd expected or what you'd wanted. Could you take us back to your mindset at that time and maybe discuss how you managed those feelings and transitions that you had during that time?
Yeah, and you're right. It is very common in baseball once you start getting up to AAA, and if you're not as highly touted or top prospect, it is a very common thing to kind of be a fill-in guy at the beginning to get your opportunity and whatnot. So it was a very, very common experience to be up and down and fly for a day, fly back for a day, fly. So it was something that I kind of watched some of my teammates experience before I was in that position. So I kind of knew that was a possibility, and I was just felt like I was embracing it. And my skill set in baseball was being very versatile. So I always joked that I wasn't great at anything, but I was average at everything. So with that skill set, I was always told how I would be better suited to go to a National League team before they got the DH implemented. So when I got traded, I was actually very excited. It was definitely bittersweet because I had spent a lot of time with the Rangers, and to be honest, I could have been released much earlier in my career. So the Rangers kind of sticking with their belief in me was something that I have a very big soft spot in my heart for. So I was a little bummed leaving my friends and some of the coaches that I had built some relationships with and what they did for me, but I was also very excited. And even with the up and down experiences, it was something that I kind of understood was part of the process. But again, that subconscious part of me didn't realize the toll that it was taking on me because unfortunately I was experiencing that with some maybe subconscious unhealthy coping habits with that. So in the moment, I felt like I was doing a good job, but it was something that was definitely a little bit of a sweep it under the rug kind of concept that caught up to me a little bit later.
Could you speak more to that, of just kind of, that internal dialogue that may have been swept under the rug? Because, it seems like that may be kind of planting some seeds at that point.
Yeah. So the internal dialogue for me is obviously something I'm not proud of. It's definitely something that hasn't completely gone away, but looking back, it was just so dramatic or so extreme, which I've done enough therapy now to realize that it stems from childhood and kind of living in that shadow, and no fault to my brother or anybody. I was putting that pressure on myself, and it created this not good enough concept and belief, or I'm an inconvenience kind of belief, because we'd rather be set my brother up for success, or I'm the reason for this divorce, or their relationship would be better. So that internal dialogue was rooted in my childhood experiences, and it followed me up until adulthood in some pretty irrational ways at times. But because I wasn't doing the work to understand that and kind of heal that, or try to at least use it or learn from it, I became very out of touch with reality internally. So there was times I was playing in a Major League Baseball game, completely convinced that I was fooling everybody, that I'm not even that good at baseball. So it's something that it's an example of how far some of that self-talk can go and how detrimental and damaging it can be, because I believe that, even though I was showing that I wasn't experiencing that. But when I would go home, I would just feel horrible about myself because I didn't feel like I was living up to my potential, and not just like, let's learn from this and let me go back to the cage tomorrow and work on adjustments. It was like, you are so worthless. You are so bad at this. I can't believe you fooled everybody to be here. You're going to get released tomorrow. You suck at baseball, kind of thing. So it was something that I was constantly picking apart my negative flaws, or something that I was weak at. But with all my teammates or any other opposing player, I was noticing everything that they were good at. So it was something that was very, again, wasn't thinking of it in words this way. It was just a feeling that I was having of going home and berating myself with words, but the feeling was just a weight or a knot in my stomach that I just felt so uncomfortable and confusing. And it's something that was stemmed from just extreme negative self-talk. And it was something that I didn't I didn't have the guts or the strength to admit that I didn't have it all figured out and wasn't willing to work on it.
Well, just to touch on that, mentioning didn't have the guts or strength to reach out at that point. I mean, is as an athlete, I think a lot of times we're conditioned to not show weakness, right? And asking for help is almost looked at as a form of weakness. So, I mean, maybe could you speak to that kind of dynamic of being an athlete and how you were kind of conditioned growing up to not, maybe is that part of the reason why you didn't ask for help?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's obviously why we're all here is because of the outdated stigma and the unnecessary stigma. But I mean, growing up as an athlete, we're told baseball is a common phrase is rub some dirt on it. Or even something I kind of elaborate on these days is even when I was experiencing success, we were told act like you've been there before. So no matter the scenario or which side of the spectrum we're on, there was a passive influence to maybe hold back your emotions or act like your emotions are different than what they are. And that's obviously understandable because it's the roller coaster part of it. If it's too extreme every single time, that can get exhausting as well. But I realized that there was a little bit of an unintentional manipulation of my feelings at times, and it's understandable. So for me, especially because I was such a outwardly emotion person, that I was a kid that was slamming my bat after every strikeout and stuff. So it's understandable. But yeah, I think that the outdated stigma is something that was so passively on my mind because I thought that it was a weakness. I was so unknowingly a part of the stigma. And now after everything I've been through and what I've been up to the last couple of years, is looking back at something that I have to spend some therapy and emotional energy on to not judge myself for, because I'm like, it's just common sense. Like, if not everyone is willing to ask for help or admit they don't have the answers, how is that not viewed as a strength? That's the same way that every other skill set is viewed, is because not everyone is able to do it. So if it's something that we can just accept and praise, because you're either aware that you don't have all the answers at all times, or you're lying to yourself if you think you do. So it's something that it kind of comes back to common sense of like, yeah, life is just really hard sometimes. And I don't expect anybody to be put together every second of their life. And that's totally okay, because life is, again, very hard. So it's understandable. And it's something that I wish I would have had somebody knock me in the head and tell me like, hey, all these things that you're showing maybe be signs of some unhealed traumas in the past or unhealed wounds and something like that. So it is available to go talk about it. And if you don't feel like it, that's okay. But when you're ready, there's people that are ready. So it's something that I think it can go such a long way, because again, at the end of the day, we've all experienced our worst day, our worst feelings at any given moment. And it's something that doesn't need to happen. It doesn't need to take the lessons that I've learned, doesn't need to take the way that I've learned these lessons. So I just think that outdated stigma is incredibly damaging. And as we all know, at some points it becomes life or death.
Drew, outside looking in at this point in your life, society tells us, well, this guy has everything. He's got the world in the palm of his hand. He's a 4th round draft pick, in Major League Baseball. So he's got everything. Like, he doesn't have any problems or any issues or whatever, right? The picture is painted so perfectly, right? But at what point, what was your reality, going through as a professional athlete? Like, what was your reality, and at what point did it change?
Yeah, and that's the other part of the stigma. That was the fuel to my unknowingly being a part of the stigma, because I was telling myself, or thinking to myself, how could you be feeling like this when you're living the life, maybe not the exact position of being an all-star or MVP or World Series champion, but you're living a life that you worked for. You have a supportive fiance. At that time, I had a supportive fiance. Although my family was split and we didn't talk that much, we still really cared about each other. So why in the world are you feeling this way? You have no reason to. Quit being a baby. Stop being so negative. And this internal dialogue of that back and forth of like, my logical brain is knowing of that, but my emotional part of me is just feeling so wounded and vulnerable. And it's something that I wasn't willing to admit, when now I'm like, yeah, vulnerability has given me all my confidence that I used to fake my whole life. So yeah, that on paper part of it is something that it's just so clear to me. And that was fueling my own internal negative self-talk. And it's something that I talk about a lot with the guys that I work with, is that, yeah, like, it's normal to still feel the human emotions, no matter what our circumstances are, because at the end of the day, I'm not the doctor, I'm not the scientist here, but majority of us are all feeling the same chemical reactions that make up our emotions, just from completely different external circumstances. So the richest person in the world and the person we see on the side of the street, their body is creating the same feeling of worry. Just the richest person is coming from maybe an entire company depending on him, and his is coming from where his next meal is. But the same feeling of worry is happening at the same level or very similar levels. So it doesn't matter if if you have achieved success or if you're still struggling paycheck to paycheck or whatever the circumstances are. We're all feeling very similar things of fear, worry, uncertainty, regret, joy, happiness. Just, it's a very temporary feeling. And it's something that I wish I would have had the understanding of that, or the willingness to at least start the process to learn that at some point, because you can't achieve your way out of depression. And I experienced that in the realest way.
Right. And, we're all former athletes. So, growing up in an era of boys don't cry, right? Was that prevalent, like going through the minor league system up to majors? Like, was it just a heightened thing once you became a professional athlete?
Yeah, I just think it's something that no one was telling me don't cry, but somewhere along the lines, I believe that. So if I ever did feel some tears coming up, I would do my best to hold them in, or at least hide it. There's plenty of times where I was feeling really upset about my performance, and I would sit in the dugout after everyone left and have a cry moment. But it was something that I intentionally did, so that way I would wait, so that way no one was around and see it. So again, I think the waves that I was experiencing were so drastically back and forth, so far on the ends of the spectrum that and so oftenly shifting that it was a very clear sign that I needed to address some of these things, so that way I can find some more of that stability and even keeledness, because they were happening way too often in a very disproportionate way to my circumstances. So it's something that wasn't ever told me, don't cry, per se, maybe at times when I was younger, but it's just something that I preconceived myself. And when I was doing that, that would just only fuel that fire of that internal dialogue and guilt trip myself into thinking that I was being a baby or being unrealistic or an inconvenience, which is still to this day one of my bigger insecurities.
So I recently read on Instagram a post of yours, and again, fact check me or correct me if I have any of this wrong, but this is where you were talking about the months leading up to your attempt, and referred to overthinking about being alone, fixating on regrets and mistakes, and also referred to a recipe of isolation, free time, and a lack of self-care. What can you tell us about what led up to your suicide attempt?
Yeah, I think that post that you're referring to actually was unfortunately a phase after my attempt, about a year or two afterwards, where I actually fell into another suicidal ideation phase. Obviously, it's unfortunate, and pride isn't the right word, but it's something that I wish I didn't have to go through, but thankfully I made it through. But I think leading up to my actual attempt, it's something that I word as the 3 ingredients for a recipe disaster. The situations that I was experiencing beforehand, but these experiences were things that just brought out that lifelong journey of these unaddressed things, that sweep it under the rug mentality, put this brave face on, let me fake this confidence, act like I'm impenetrable and things like that. So, but for me, that after I got traded to the Cardinals and played that season up and down with Memphis in the big league team, I had my first significant injury, that made me miss a good enough time I was going to be missing a good enough time that the Cardinals ended up releasing me during the season, which I had plenty of injuries beforehand or be able to play through them, but I was always able to have either a short period of time on the injured list or be around the team and experience that camaraderie, the clubhouse feel. So that first time really being released with a couple months left, being at home in charge of my own rehab from a reconstructed elbow, and being at home watching my teammates on TV in my living room in my house was the most uncomfortable feeling and the most confusing feeling, because I feel like I'm supposed to be out there. So it was my first time experiencing that. And again, did not have the willingness to try to put words to that. So it was just this internal feeling that I didn't even try to put words to, that was just bubbling inside of me. And that came out in a projected way of being a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more irritable, a little bit more short temper than I normally was. And unfortunately, the closest person to me at the time was an angel of a partner and my fiance. And she really, unfortunately, took a lot of that isolation, because for me, with again, therapy coming into play here that I've learned that my childhood with the split parents, when I had disrupt, I would physically run to my other parents' house to get myself some peace. So that carried into adulthood where uncomfortable situations, I would try to leave that environment and go isolate. So I became very closed off, short worded and anything. And I actually got to a point where I thought that she was also the problem or part of the problem, or maybe just not right for me, even though she had supported me so much throughout that point. So that injury and being released, at a time where my career wasn't completely certain that I would be given an opportunity to come back from that career, lingered into a bunch of fear and projection onto Diana. So the injury was the first ingredient. That was around August of 2019, having a rough off season in projection, and then into 2020 in February 1st ish is when I called off the engagement and convinced myself that I would be better off without her. And that second ingredient, I'm calling it off, was what turned the lights on of suicidality in my life, and seeing the hurt that I was experiencing passed on to someone that I cared about, because it devastated her that I was walking away from her. I really saw what I was experiencing and how it could affect other people, and it wrecked me to see her hurting as badly as I did, as I hurt her. And it really started to make me question things like, man, I just clearly am not happy, and I can't even appreciate my career, this amazing fiance. What am I doing here? Everything I'm doing is getting tainted by some kind of negative thought, and this is miserable. And so that's when that first thought came to mind of maybe this isn't worth it. And unfortunately, from then on, it was on my mind almost every second of the day. I was fortunate enough to sign with the Giants on a minor league invite deal. And a couple of days after calling with the wedding or the engagement, I was on my way to spring training to make that comeback, and I was doing okay, but it was on my mind so much so we're in the middle of an at bat, take a swing, foul pitch off, step out. You're supposed to be working on your approach or getting ready for that bat. A quick little thought, be like, it doesn't matter. I'm about to go do this tonight. So it was something that was, again, once it was kind of planted, it was something I couldn't turn off. And that's another part of the regret that I try to work through today is with, why didn't I just tell somebody? Why? Like, why did I have to believe that it was a sign of weakness and not a strength? Why couldn't I just told somebody? Because at the time I was even going through therapy. I know this is a very long-winded answer, but the third ingredient was the quarantine. With the pandemic shutting everything down, that was that final ingredient for that recipe of disaster that was pretty unfortunate, because of calling off the engagement. When I returned home to quarantine, I walked into a house that all I had known at that point was Diana and our two dogs. And because she took Ellie and the other dog, I walked into a dead silent house after going through a month and a half of thinking about taking my life, almost nonstop. And I remember not hearing Ellie's footsteps running towards me at the door and saying out loud to myself, I'm in trouble. And unfortunately, within that next month and a half, I had bought a gun. In the quarantine, I was just drowning in my negative thoughts. And again, didn't have the strength to tell somebody how much I was struggling. And unfortunately convinced myself that it wasn't worth it, and tried to end it on April 16th of 2020.
So you mentioned you didn't have the strength to ask for help, and we've already talked about this a little bit, and it's not easy to ask for help. But was there anything in particular in your mind that really discouraged you from reaching out in particular?
It was just my preconceived, unknowingly part of the stigma brain that was telling me, you're being dramatic. You're being such a baby. Why are you feeling so bad? So again, the devil and angel concept, one was telling me I shouldn't be feeling the way I'm feeling. The other part of me is just, I'm feeling this whether we like it or not. So here's this outwardly projection. But again, I wasn't taking the time to put the words to it. And even I mentioned earlier that I was seeing a therapist beforehand, or at least started therapy, but I was knowingly holding back in therapy. And that's the other big regret, is that not just having the strength to ask for help, but I was in therapy paying for help, but acting like it was, I'm just here to try to get a little bit better. So just scratch that itch of healing, but not actually admit to anything because I was too ashamed. So I don't think there's one thing that caused me to not be able to have the strength to ask for help. But it was something that, unfortunately, for some reason, I believe that I was just being irrational, and it's something that I just was so low on self-esteem and so low on self-love that regardless of even if I had the education at that point, I don't know if I would have had the self-confidence, because without the authenticity and without the vulnerability, I wouldn't have been able to admit that I'm actually about to take my life. So it's something that I just wish I would have. I wish I would have heard the quote that people would rather hear from you than about you, no matter how dramatic it is. But that's also a shoulda, coulda, woulda game that I try not to lean into too much these days. But it's just, again, self-acceptance of it happened. Let's learn from it. But I just wish I would have had the strength that so many people do have, of saying, I don't have all the answers, I need some help, and then let's get through this together.
You mentioned April 16th, 2020. Can you talk about the steps you took in seeking help after that day?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to survive what I survived, which, again, we've talked a couple times about what's on paper versus reality. And for me, the on paper part of this story has been told to me is shouldn't have happened. So anatomically, I shouldn't have survived what I survived. I waited in my house for 20 hours after pulling the trigger before I got help. And so I was the one that decided to get help. So it was another part of the story where I reflect on a lot and share that I had the most intense version of choosing life. But that's something that I reflect on a lot now, is that we all have a choice in life, or choice on life every day, on very much smaller circumstances. But getting to that 20th hour and realizing this is clearly not happening, or not working the way I thought it, or is not going the way I thought it was going to go. Maybe I'm supposed to survive this. And choosing to press the call button on 911 myself is something that I think kickstarted this shift, or this release of all these shameful feelings that I had towards myself. Because once I got to the hospital and was told I was going to be able to get through it, it was immediately, let me tell someone I'm sorry, I'm grateful, I'm not going to do this again. And it really kickstarted this really powerful opening of who I really was. Because one, I physically couldn't hide what I was feeling anymore. Like, there was nothing to hide anymore. I did what I did. And so family that I wasn't very communicative with, here's my reasons, but here's what I've already learned. And I'm grateful that I did survive, because now I can tell you guys how much I care about you and how much I love you, because I've had a big heart my whole life, but I try to dull it down because I was supposed to be this tough guy. And so the first 2 weeks I was in the ICU, just becoming physically stable, spent a stint in the psych ward, and 2.5 weeks later, I was able to return home. And throughout the whole time, it was still during quarantine, so no one was able to visit me in person. So there's a bunch of phone calls that I was just talking to my family and friends' ears off the whole time about how much I'm excited to see them and how appreciative I am of them. So that reunion of being back home and starting my healing process was something that I think about now. I journal on a lot. It's something that does give me fuel during the dark times at times, because, again, I didn't need to take that attempt to get to that point. I could have been doing this all along. It was just telling the truth about what had happened all up until April 16th. So that's another thing I'm very passionate about. Like, the lessons I've learned did not need to be learned in the intensity that I learned them in, because what I'm doing now, I could have very easily been doing without the attempt attached to my name, with my right eye still. And it's something that I was excited to get into therapy. I was excited to start some medication. I was excited to tell people I'm in therapy, so I can reassure the people that care about me, who are worried that I might try again. It was a very powerful experience, and it's something that was just a part of the journey, because has been some waves since then. But again, one of the more powerful experiences, and something that I won't ever forget, obviously, and it's something that I use to this day to help me and hopefully anyone willing to listen.
In the documentary Alive, you were repeating life is beautiful, right, to the reporter Jeff Bassan. And I just want to know, like, what is the definition of beauty, of being beautiful to you now, compared to when you were before April 16th?
I think for me, it was just experiencing authenticity and present-mindedness, and just telling the truth. I wish there was some more, like, earth-shattering, groundbreaking news there, but I was just crippled by my past regrets, or my worry of the future circumstances, or what was going to happen, that I was never present. And again, I put on a lot of quick moments of fake personality, although looking back, there was a lot of parts that I was showing that was my true self. It was really this fake, demeaning voice that I had towards myself and believed towards myself. So I think just living in the present moment at times and experiencing what it felt like to just be my most authentic self and not have to apologize or not have to feel like I'm inconvenienced. Like, oh, I'm feeling here. I don't want to. Sorry to inconvenience you if I'm feeling too much here, or if I'm too happy here or too sad here. Just being authentic, being vulnerable, willing to admit that I don't have all the answers at all times, but I'm willing to at least try to figure them out or try to accept them. And I think being present was something I was experiencing in a very heightened way for the first time in my life. And it was one of the more freeing feelings that I had ever experienced. And it's something that I still tell myself or make myself practice this day. Most of my struggles to this day are usually because I'm living either in the past or future thinking. So I think that's something that went a really long way for that time.
So this might be a tough question. It may not go anywhere, but just kind of thinking about, because of the fact that there was isolation and we're in quarantine at the time, but is there something that those around you may have missed or dismissed about your mental health that they could have seen as something that could have helped at that time?
At that time, no, because like I said, I was so consciously not showing that or trying to show that. But I think the one thing that was noticeable was, again, the pattern that I had shown throughout my entire life as a kid up until, like, I think if someone would have just asked, why are you so afraid to fail right now? Why are you so not okay with striking out when you get to have another at bat in 5 minutes? Just very deep, open-ended questions, because I think the pattern was that projection that I was having. And it's obviously shows in so many different ways and from person to person. But for me, being such a wear my heart on my sleeve kind of kid and person, those outwardly projections and those reactions to things in very disproportionate ways, I think were signs. And so I just think that that's where the questions could have been asked, or the support could have been offered. And knowing me, I would have not accepted it because I was a very stubborn, closed-minded, insecure person. But the time leading up to my attempt, I've been told plenty of times that I was literally the last person that someone would have ever thought, because, again, I thought that I was faking it in behind closed doors, but I was a very boys kind of guy in the clubhouse. I was very close to my friends, had a great time, and had probably the most fun. And that's what I mean by baseball's not all bad, because looking back, I have some of the most enjoyable memories possible because I was having so much fun. And I've just had to learn that was the realest part of me, not the part that was when I went home and beat myself up about it. So up until that, or leading up to the attempt, there wasn't anything that I don't think anyone could have known, because I tried as hard as I did to make sure no one knew that I was thinking those things.
Can you talk about your experiences now, moving forward with therapy, and what it's like, just being in therapy and speaking with someone? Because we're still, to this day, we're still dealing with these stigmas of, I'm a person of color, so in the African American community, you even mentioned like the word therapy, the first thing that comes out is like, oh, you must be crazy, or like, what's wrong with you, So can you talk about what your experience has been so far, going through that therapy process, and just, is it a weekly thing, like a daily thing? What are some tips and tools that you use that help you the best?
Yeah, for me, I see it as an opportunity to lead by example, to help end the stigma. So I've committed one weekly therapy session for the last 4 years. And it's something that it's something that has given me all the confidence that I had been faking my whole life, because it's an opportunity to say, yeah, I go to therapy, and then accept the person's reaction. So it's like, if they have that hesitancy or that kind of like side look, like, yeah, I go to therapy. Right. So be it. What else you got for me? Like, I go to therapy. Everybody should go to therapy, or whatever. Like, it's something that I have found has helped me. So I talk about it. I brag about it the same way that I brag about any other accomplishment that I get in my life, or any kind of physical thing that I've done in the weight room or something, because it's something that I've learned the hard way of how important it is for me. And it's something that I've been told, and there's obviously a lot of research out there that is a helpful space, but there's so many forms of it. And so for me, the weekly therapy session has been a big part of my my mental health healing journey. But it's something that I just think is so, again, unnecessarily stigmatized because
Right.
it's we all have had our worst day. We all have known a time in our life that we're not the most proud of, and I think getting a space to just let things out, whether it's just a venting session, a purge, just whatever. Sometimes just physically hearing how I've been internally perceiving things throughout the week, helps me catch myself like that is how I've felt, but that's not how I believe, or that's not what I believe in, or what I align with. So it's something that allows me to practice what I preach and lead by example, because I think that as a kid who was looking up to so many people my whole life and was influenced, whether intentionally or passively, I think the person that might be struggling and might see someone like confidently say like, yeah, of course I go to therapy.
Right.
Why don't you? What are you so afraid about? And really break down that perception on it, because it's usually influenced by some kind of movie or some kind of um, background of somebody telling them that it's crazy, but it's very close-ended or very short-ranged belief. So it gives me an opportunity to be confident in something that I used to be hesitant about.
Nice. Thank you. Can you tell us about the work you do for the San Francisco Giants and other Major League Baseball teams, and also speak on a little bit about your foundation, Better You?
Yeah, so my title is mental health advocate for the San Francisco Giants. It's a newly created role. I did make a comeback after my attempt, and I got to play for a season. Um, and while it was something that was, again, a part of the story that I have so much appreciation for and think about often, because the playing time and the stats weren't necessarily there where they needed to be. I was finding joy, because my story had been released before that season, that I was in the same exact environment that I was before, but having completely different conversations with my teammates, guys that I had known for 10 years, 5 years, and seeing that I was a conduit to them being able to admit finally that they need some help as well. And it was something that I was finding so much joy in and passion for. Like, man, I knew the reason I wanted to share my story with that E60 was for that reason, to try to help and encourage others to not do what I did, and not learn the way that I learned, but being more in the room or hands on with, like, yeah, just this is my experience and don't do this or do this or whatever. It was something that was really cool, and it started a pretty big interest in the guys meeting with our sports psychologist that we had in house. So because I was working with her myself, and then having those candid conversations with the guys, one of the first times that she came to the team, that she said there was like 8 guys that were wanted to meet, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on here?" And like, no, Drew just says it's a good preventative or proactive kind of approach, and something that is actually, the earlier you do it, it's helpful and more empowering, and it can even be a competitive advantage in some regards. So once I had shared with the team that I was not getting as much fulfillment from playing every 8th day and hitting 130 anymore. I can't really do this the same way I used to do with one eye. They offered an opportunity to create this role. And so I kind of I word myself as a bridge between the players and staff and our sports psychologists, clinical psychologists, and performance coaches, mental performance coaches that we have on the Giant staff. And sometimes even act as like an amateur therapist and be the comfort zone for someone who's still a little hesitant, because it's coming from someone who knows what it's like to be in their shoes. And so I word myself as the bridge, amateur therapist, mental health translator, starting line, whatever, to try to help people, again, just realize that you don't need to do this alone at every time. You don't need to act like everything's great every second of your life, because it becomes very exhausting and very overwhelming. So basically just don't do what I did, and realize that this is very helpful. And the earlier you start, the more of an empowering process it becomes.
So, Drew, you've already mentioned some of the ongoing struggles and some of the treatment that you're continuing to do now. Could you share some words of wisdom for some others who may be struggling right now?
For me, a big thing is, like I mentioned earlier, my quote is, people would rather hear from you than about you. I think that's the big overall message, that just get it out. I don't know what the science is, but it just feels good. We all do it on some form. Everyone knows that we vent to our coworkers when we spill our coffee or someone cuts us off on the way to work. Like, venting is very freeing. And it's just a very intensified version of that. So that just feels good. But I think the other things are just kind of the idea that it's temporary. The wounds and scars obviously aren't, but the feelings that you have can become temporary. From someone who was pretty pessimistic and negative towards myself for a majority of my life, I have learned that even though that felt like an everyday kind of thing, it has become something that is theoretically temporary. So I think all feelings and certain things that we go through are experiences, not identities, and it's something that gives me hope for when I'm going through one of my episodes or one of my ruts, that even though it doesn't fix anything right in that moment, it feeds a little bit of this part of my head that's faith based. That's like, it's very small back there. Like everything still feels like it sucks, but I know it won't always be this way. Maybe next week, maybe next month, maybe tomorrow, in the next 3 hours, I'll feel better. And it doesn't fix anything right at that moment, but it gives me a little bit of peace knowing that it won't always be this way, and I can get through this because I've shown that I can. So I think the idea of temporary, I think the idea that mental health challenges, disorders, diagnosis, they're not our identity. They're just things that we experience. So I experience depressive symptoms at times rather than I am depressed. I think the words go a really long way. And it's something that just understanding that it's just a part of us. It's not our entire identity. So that's another thing that I think I was misunderstanding beforehand, was that if I told someone that I'm insecure or feel vulnerable right now, then all of a sudden all I'm ever going to talk about is that one thing, when it's like, no, we can get into it a little bit here, but 5 minutes from now we can get back to talking about funny memes and cool shoes and things like that. It's just a part of our reality. So it's not something that has to be a death sentence, and it's something that could be learned from, healed from, or continue to heal, because that's something that I've learned is, and I was naively believing at certain points, is that I'm never going to have a bad day again, because I just had this powerful near-death experience that I'm incredibly grateful that I had to learn from. And then bam, I had my first tough stretch, and I had to learn that this is a journey, and it's a healing journey rather than a healed journey. So I think the understanding of all this kind of comes back to just acceptance. I think it's just accept that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be your best every second of every day, and just accept that if I'm not my best right now, or if I feel like crap for the last year or 2, 5 years, it doesn't always have to be this way. And there's ways to get out of that darkness, because I got gifted an opportunity to experience that. But then I also have had an episode or a phase after my attempt where I actually had a plan to try again, but I got to experience the fruits of my labor, because although I was eerily close or eerily experiencing things in the same way, I held on and got to realize that I could get through it. And so I think a lot of people are a lot more capable than they realize, and a lot more resilient than they realize, because again, like I said earlier, we're all a lot more alike than we realize, because we're all feeling pretty similar things, just on different levels from different things.
Thank you, Drew. So let's give it up for Drew.
And Ellie.
Hey, don't forget Ellie too. We can't forget Ellie.
And give a round of applause for Ellie.